party funding is always a massive issue, but we don't normally talk about donations of this nature or this huge amount. Tom Skinner.
Well, Musk himself isn't a permissible donor, so he wouldn't be allowed to make any donation, but he probably could find a way through the UK arm of one of his companies to make the donation, which does put the Electoral Commission in a difficult position, because who's ultimately making that decision? Is it, if it's a decision by Musk to tell X in the UK...
So he would do it through X or
UK
Tesla.
Yeah. Which then they'd have to prove that it was that company making the donation rather than Musk doing it himself. And probably the problem that Reform have got themselves into is because this is now described as Elon Musk's donation to Reform, people will be looking for that clear link. Whereas if it had been slightly more sort of cloak and dagger under the radar and Tesla just made a big donation to Reform, it would have been much easier for them to justify. So I think they have to be very careful not to get themselves in real hot water if he does make a big donation.
So you think it's a serious possibility that the Electoral Commission could turn it down?
There's definitely that possibility, because you've got to prove where all your funds come from.
But in a sense, that would absolutely play into Nigel Farage's hands, wouldn't it, from a reputational point of view, because he'd say, here we are, the establishment, they're all against me.
Yeah, it definitely would. It would really help his insurgency and the anti-establishment narrative, for sure.
Helen?
I'm not sure that people in the UK want to see international billionaires influencing the outcome of our elections, because even if you're a fan of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and obviously I'm a Liberal Democrat, don't really share their values, it could be some other billionaire with a much more concerning background, couldn't it? It could be a foreign dictator, somebody connected with Russia. If all you have to do is set up a company here and kind of channel it through, that's really, really concerning. So I think as a point
You
of
mean
principle,
like your Liberal Democrat donor did? What's his name? Michael, somebody in 2005 donated £2 million fraudulently.
I don't recall that.
It's going back a long time.
Yeah, that is going back a long time. But I think we're talking about, well, it wasn't quite at school. I wish. But I think we're talking about, billions and billions of pounds, or, what is this, £78 million if you turn dollars into pounds, potentially an unlimited amount if it's coming from a billionaire, which could really have a material impact on the outcome of an election. I don't think it's really in the spirit of the rules for that to be funneled through some kind of UK company from a foreign source. And as I say, if you allow this one, then you're opening yourselves up to essentially all sorts of dirty money from all around the world, and I think that's really concerning.
What about if it was a UK billionaire? Because, for example, Lord Sainsbury, David Sainsbury, he's donated, I would say, tens of millions of pounds to Labour over the years. Now, it's been done in dribs and drabs, but if you add it up all together, it wouldn't be 100 million, but it wouldn't be far off, probably 50. Where do you draw the line at one person's individual influence?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it certainly deserves a review of how parties are funded in this country and how that does impact the outcome of elections. Obviously, if it's somebody who's in the UK, who's a taxpayer in the UK, that's less concerning than if it's potentially some kind of malign foreign influence. And I'm not suggesting that Elon Musk is malign, but the structure that we're talking about...
lawyers will be very happy that you just caveated that.
But what I'm saying is the structure that he's proposing could potentially be used in a different way. We need to be very wary about foreign influence in our politics for a start off. And then I think when it comes to funding... I think it would restore trust in politics if we looked at how parties are funded and actually came up with some kind of sensible frame of reference. But at the moment, every party is sort of, dealing with the rules that we've got and trying to work around them.
But what could be more liberal than allowing individuals to donate what they want to a political party? Because if you go down the road of state funding, which I suspect you might...
I'm not going down the road of state funding, but I think we need to have a look at, what constitutes fair funding.
Okay.
I don't even think so. I don't even think it's necessarily the donation per se. I think the bigger concern is he's got one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, social media platforms. He's constantly making digs at the UK. I'm no fan of the left or Labour at the moment. However, if it was somebody...
Really? You've hidden it well in this programme.
And to be honest with you, when it comes came to the manifesto, I actually liked reforms out of all of the parties. But I don't like the way how Elon is behaving online. I think he should stay out of British politics, as much as he is doing, for the simple fact that he has the biggest platform, seeing as it is his platform. He came along and said there's going to be democracy and all. How is it democratic if he's having such a strong opposition or an influence? And I think, aside from the donation, this can be seen as, interference if we come closer to the elections.
Would you be saying this if he was intending to donate this money to the Conservative Party?
Well, as I said, I have no loyalty to a party. I've worked for the Labour Party. I've voted for the Conservative Party. I would vote for reform. But my main point is it's the money, the influence, the power and the platform and all of those elements together. I think it makes for interference on a huge scale, especially when we get closer to the elections. And even recently there was an exchange where he said something quite, critical of UK politics, and he said, well, when's the next election? And Nigel Farage said, they're coming up, the local election coming up in May, and all good. It's like this...
Well, they may not be, because apparently Labour are looking to abolish them. I was reading this morning.
Well, even that exchange, or how Elon carries himself, I don't think, whether you're left, right, centre, whatever, I don't think you should have somebody that is so influential, and not in the most mature of ways either, like how he is.
Well,
Chris.
You could always buy a newspaper and influence an election in the UK that way, because the Labour Party and the Tories, I think the Liberal Democrats, are quite easy if media tycoons want to put their support behind them in elections by newspapers come out and support them. But I just think it's dead hypocritical.
I'd love to know which newspaper you think is behind the Liberal Democrats.
The Somerset Gazette. I think it's very, very rich, though, that we have people saying that Elon Musk shouldn't interfere in UK politics, when Liberal Democrat and Labour parliamentarians took time off their day job to fly to America to interfere in the American election by knocking up doors and saying, please vote Kamala Harris. So we can't have it both ways. Either you don't want people to interfere in politics that don't live here, and if that's what you think, then you shouldn't fly, across the Atlantic when you're supposed to be at Parliament doing your job, to then say, please vote this way in this election. Just one quick point on the money. The $100 million is it's very obscene in UK terms. It's the sort of money that if the Reform spent all of that in the short campaign and the long campaign, it would still leave £10 million a year, every year, leading up to the next election to spend on campaigning, and that would be outspending the Tories 5-1. So that is a concern if you can clearly put that amount of money into the system. On the permissibility, the last government created a silly bit of legislation that anyone anywhere in the world can attest that they once lived somewhere in the UK. So you could simply just say, once upon a time, lived in Blackpool.
Don't you have to be on the UK electoral register?
No. If you live in Australia or California, you can have a test that you once lived in a UK constituency, and that makes you an elector in the UK. So it was a silly piece of legislation. Liberal Democrats, I think, were actually opposed to that.
If you're taking donations from people, you have to check that they're on the UK electoral roll.
The point I mean is you can join the UK electoral roll simply by attesting that you once lived in a UK constituency. That's the rules that the Conservatives brought in. At the time, I did think it was about being able to channel money into the country, because you could then all of a sudden get very rich people who are living in California or Australia that have not been here for 50 years, claiming they once upon a time lived in Devon or Blackpool. Then they can suddenly put money into our system. So we do need to have a laser focus on actually what does political campaigning look like over the next 5-10 years with new media? How much is that going to cost? And is there a democracy and a parity of esteem if you allow a system that one very rich person can effectively say, I'm going to influence this election because I'm going to give 10 times the money that everyone's got?
Let me just question you on that, because I don't think that's right. If you're, let's say a Russian citizen, for example, and you've lived in the UK for a year, you can't just suddenly join the UK electoral register.
I don't know any specifics to do with that country, but the new rules that were in place at the last election meant that you could attest, i.e. you don't have to actually produce any evidence, you could attest that you once lived in a certain constituency.
Yeah, but you have to be a British citizen. You can't just be a foreign national and say, because I lived there for 3 days in 1983.
It's the same as putting money through a company. Then I'm sure he knows a few UK citizens that live near Mar-a-Lago. It's not a difficult.
It's easy to get through the back door.
It's not a difficult system the way it's been set up. If someone really rich wants,
I can sense a campaign for you, Helen, here.
Well, I think there is a valid point that is the Electoral Commission able to look through a donation and see what the source of the funds are, and they need to be able to do that and establish whether or not it's a permissible donation from a UK citizen or it isn't, and you can talk about whether the rules are fit for purpose. And I've already said I think we should have a review over whether they are fit for purpose, and whether the amounts that people can put in is really distorting UK politics.
I think it's concerning also, sorry to interject, that Reform is a limited company with Nigel Farage being a main shareholder. Like I said, I liked their manifesto, but if we're going to talk about democracy and huge donations into a limited company, I don't think that's democratic at all. And Nigel Farage for Reform as a political party need to change that.
Simon says, your guest is wrong. I had to do this. You can't just attest. I had to actually provide real evidence that I had lived in the constituency. I mean, I'm assuming he's British anyway, but you can't just say, well, I lived there. You've got to provide some sort of evidence.
Well, we obviously never tried it because we weren't soliciting votes in Australia or America, but it is a system of attestation.